I call the honourable member for Dawson for what is probably his maiden participation in a matter of public importance debate.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is absolutely clear that this government has failed to take decisive action to tackle the cost of living for Australian families. Wherever I go in my regional electorate of Dawson, I hear the same stories from workers, from small businessmen and women, from farmers, from pensioners. They are struggling with the rising costs of living. Earlier this year, the Mackay-based Regional Social Development Centre came out in the attack on this issue in the local media. At that time, the headline of the local Mackay newspaper, the Daily Mercury, read, "Mackay families struggle with the rise." The article read, "Household bills are set to skyrocket and our families will pay the price, with homelessness, domestic violence, gambling and drug use expected to rise as a result. Some people, including long-term residents, will be forced out of the region as they struggle to meet unexpected costs," according to Mackay Regional Council for Social Development Business Development Coordinator Deborah Ray. Electricity bills are expected to rise 13% this financial year, she said, adding to already spiralling household costs, and increased operating expenses could force Mackay Regional Council to lift rates by double figures in the coming months. "The number of families who are struggling is bigger than most people realise," Ms Ray said. "It's difficult to capture that number because many families who come to our region and who struggle leave because of the unexpected high cost of living." Ms Ray said the number of homeless people in Mackay had significantly risen in recent years, as the number of people forced to move to other, more affordable areas. This is serious stuff, Mr Deputy Speaker. The rising cost of living is hurting families in the Mackay region and in Dawson, and it's also hurting those who are trying to help those families. I refer to another article from the Mercury, this one titled "Soaring Costs Hurt Charity Workers," and the article reads, "After years of offering help to those who are struggling, the Mackay chapter of the Tribe of Judah, a local charity, has itself been hit hard. With rental prices on the rise, the charity has become a victim, enduring a rent rise of more than double. Our rent is going to be from about $23,000 to about $46,500, Pastor Hayho of the Tribe of Judah said. The problem of rental costs and also housing costs is a massive one in the Mackay region. Last year, the 6th Annual Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey examined 272 markets in 6 countries, including Australia, the US, the UK, Canada and New Zealand. The study included Mackay in my electorate of Dawson and found that the housing market was severely unaffordable. That fact is not news to many first-home buyers in the Mackay region that are trying to get into the housing market. The data released from the survey revealed that the cost of living in some regions throughout Queensland is comparable to living in New York or London, cities that are renowned to be the most expensive in the world. Last year, at a time when the then Prime Minister was the man who said he was going to ease the squeeze for Australian families, the Daily Mercury reported the headline, "Rent in Mackay set to skyrocket." It said that Mackay is heading into a rental property squeeze and prices are set to head skywards as houses become scarce. So what is the government doing? I'd like to say nothing, Mr Deputy Speaker. At least that would mean they were indifferent to the problem. But the reality is they're making it worse. Under the former Prime Minister, the member for Griffith, they had 2 programs that dealt with housing affordability, the National Rental Affordability Scheme and the Housing Affordability Fund. I note that both of those programs have been abandoned, at least according to comments made during the election. Electricity costs are on the rise, as I said, with the Regional Social Development Council in Mackay expecting them to go up at least 13% this financial year, and I've got to say it's probably going to be more than that. And what are the government doing about that? Again, I would like to say nothing, because it would be better to be indifferent than to be part of the problem. But they are part of the problem. They want to introduce a carbon tax, a tax that they promised not to introduce, and a tax that will hit everyone, pushing up the price of just about everything, notably electricity. And there's a lot of talk about the need for a carbon tax because of certainty, as if certainty of a carbon tax is some sort of a good thing. Well, Mr Speaker, you don't accept a bad thing just because it's certain or just to get certainty. If that's the case, you'd wake up in the morning, send all your money to the ATO and then you'd shoot yourself, because the only things that in life that are certain are death and taxes. It will impact this carbon tax will impact families in more ways than one. Not only will it put up the price of everything, but it will also put the squeeze on investment and jobs. In September, the Mackay-Whitsunday Regional Economic Development Corporation, of which I've got to mention that the Labor candidate for Dawson actually sits on the board of this Economic Development Corporation, they expressed their concerns about this carbon tax. Again from the Daily Mercury, Regional Economic Development Corporation Chief Executive Officer Narelle Pearce said she was concerned about the effect a carbon tax would have on the Bowen Basin. It certainly is a risk for our region. It's something the government has been talking about for some time, she said. Well, it certainly is a risk for our region. It's a risk for our nation, and it's a risk for Australian families. A letter to the editor in today's Daily Mercury pretty much summed up my views. It said Gillard's ideas need to be consigned to the scrap heap before she wrecks more of the economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, we in the Coalition have a better way of dealing with climate and the environment, and it will not cost jobs or family budgets. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, costs are increasing and this government is doing nothing but adding to the problem. As the Prime Minister said recently, the government's pretty much lost its way, and I would say it continues to lose its way when it does nothing to help ordinary Australian families from the continual cost of living increases. I note the Australian picked up on this the other day and they drew an analogy between the government and that very frustrating TV show Lost. I quote from the Australian, "Labor's Lost begins with a plane crash that strands the surviving passengers of Kevin 07 on a tropical island, forcing Labor MPs and the independents to work together to stay alive. But their survival is immediately threatened by various mysterious entities, including a carbon price, the haunting ghost of Kevin Rudd, an unseen creature that roams the jungle, or the Latham, and the island's malevolent and largely unseen inhabitants known as focus groups." Being a fan of cult TV shows, Mr Speaker, that snippet got me thinking of other descriptors for the government in terms of TV shows. And we could look at the Rainbow Coalition of Labor, Extreme Green and a few independents. It's certainly not the Brady Bunch, but perhaps it's more different strokes. And we could look at Senator Bob Brown and the Prime Minister almost arm in arm at recent press conferences and conclude it's the odd couple. Then again, perhaps not. It might be more who's the boss. And we could look at the promise that was made to the Australian people before the election of no carbon tax, a promise that was made by the Prime Minister twice, has been said in this chamber, and then we could look at the incessant push for such a tax as soon as Labor formed government. Well, that's pretty much the TV show Lie to me, isn't it? We could look at the absolute mess that we're getting into already on this government, on water and the Murray-Darling, on illegal immigration, on the unravelling mining tax, or the NBN white elephant. It's all turning into a mess. And so we could be forgiven those on the other side are a bunch of muppets. Or perhaps we're being run by the Dukes of Hazzard. And we could take Senator Doug Cameron at his word about these guys being zombies and wonder if we're in the Twilight Zone or perhaps if the Addams family are in charge. We can look at the fact this government thinks it's going to solve the illegal immigration problem through East Timor when East Timor doesn't agree with that. They must be living on Fantasy Island. But the big issue of the day, Mr Deputy Speaker, is of course banks and rising interest rates, and the fact that the government has done nothing to counter the problem of them putting interest rates above the RBA cash levels. And what we have got from the government is nothing, well actually not a bit more than nothing, a lot of talk, a lot of bluster, a lot of barking at the gate. We've had a Treasurer who's issued more than 30 separate warnings to the bank not to raise interest rate levels above RBA levels, and every warning has been ignored. And it struck me then, Mr Speaker, the perfect TV show for the government is Get Smart. And we got our own Maxwell and the Treasurer himself, cornered by the four big fat banks, all threatening to pull the rates trigger, and he puffs out his chest and says, "Would you believe that I have this place surrounded with a SWAT team, an armoured personnel carrier and a dozen killer attack dogs? No? Would you believe a security guard, a mini moke and an angry pit bull? How about an old lady, a stroller and a poodle?" You know, the Treasurer is the Maxwell Smart of Australian politics, and for all the bluff and bluster his government are doing absolutely nothing about the banks and their reprehensible actions. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have a government that is lost in a mess, doing nothing but adding to the problems that Australian families are facing. and we can only hope the crossbenchers supporting this mob see the light soon, or it's going to be mission impossible to turn this ship around.